And this was a heartbreaking moment and a massive opportunity for England's top goal scorer, the talisman and their captain, to kind of, I think, put them on the road to glory, genuine chance. And I'm founder, secretary, chairman and lifelong president of the Harry Kane fan club. I really am. I think he's amazing and one of the best players England have ever had, one of the best players I've seen and covered.
It is a case you have to have a special mentality to be along there and be a good tourist. And it turns out, from what it looked like from our point of view, that he wasn't a particularly good tourist and didn't see eye to eye with the England coaching staff. You can't just sit there and say, well, actually, I'm just here to write about the football. You know, I'm just here to write about Lionel Messi. I'm just here to write about whether, like, you know, Harry Kane scored his penalty or not. You know, that was there all the time. The politics was there in the background every time you looked up to the stands.
So many times it's the focal point, and basically we're thinking, okay, this is going to be a classic. It's got all the ingredients and it never lives up to expectation. This one, the drama, the excitement, the storyline.
Welcome to Make Football Great Again, the podcast that's not only your definitive 48-nation roadmap to the 2026 World Cup, but is also taking you behind the velvet rope of the world's biggest sporting event. I'm Harry Brent, and today I'm joined by John Cross and Andy Dunn, who will be bringing you the Untold Stories of Qatar 2022, one of the strangest, most controversial, and to be honest, like most emotionally intense World Cups I think we've ever had, you know, particularly from an England perspective. Great to have you both on. How are we doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Nice to see you.
Good, thank you.
So Qatar 2022, the first and hopefully the last Winter World Cup, at least from my perspective. I don't know how you guys feel. The first World Cup in the Middle East, the second ever in Asia. We had air-conditioned stadiums in the middle of the desert, barely any booze from the fans, or the journalists for that matter. And unfortunately, an ever-present undercurrent of political and social tension, which, you know, we'll touch on a little bit later. The tournament saw the global breakout, at least from an England perspective, of Jude Bellingham, Morocco becoming the first African nation to reach the semi-finals, Cristiano Ronaldo getting sensationally dropped from the Portugal starting 11 for the first time, and Lionel Messi finally winning the World Cup in what was arguably, I think it's fair to say, one of the greatest finals of all time. For England, though, it was yet another heartbreak. Defeat to France in the quarterfinal, with Harry Kane agonisingly missing a penalty in the last minute to equalise. Expectations were high going in. Let's be honest. From again, you know, with looking at England, they'd reached the final of Euro 2020 the year before. You know, they'd looked strong in the early stages, big wins over Iran and Wales and Senegal. But it obviously all ended in heartbreak. Olivier Giroud, who could not hit a barn door in Russia 4 years prior, let's be honest, scores a magnificent header to send England home. And I think for the first time raised genuine doubts about Gareth Southgate's credentials as England boss. But I think for England, the defining moment has to be Harry Kane's late penalty miss against France. He'd obviously scored a penalty earlier in the game, but skied this one over the bar. John, after the game, you were there in the mix zone when Harry came to speak to the press directly after the result. Tell us about that. What was that like?
Yeah, it was a strange one, really, because Harry Kane, I think, has been so good for England, so reliable and so consistent that basically when England, you know, just sort of 10 minutes left or whatever, England get a penalty to make it 2-2. And England, I personally thought, were playing really well. They'd gone behind, but basically came back. It's 2-1. You think, well, if he scores this, England are going to win in extra time. You know, sometimes you feel a game's momentum shift. And I just felt that was such a defining moment, England heartbreak, basically, because I do tend to think, yeah, who knows? It would have been one of those again that we go on. And I think 4 years on from Russia, 4.5 years on from Russia, I think England more mature, better, And this was a heartbreaking moment and a massive opportunity for England's top goal scorer, the talisman and their captain, to kind of, I think, put them on the road to glory, a genuine chance. And so it's impossible to understate just what a defining moment that is for England and for Harry Kane and the heartbreak, because you think this is it. That was the moment, and he skied it over the bar. And basically it was a haunting moment. You could see that it was absolutely desolate. I think he took too long over the penalty. He was clearly very unlike Harry Kane. Basically he's normally kind of got such a routine, but he took so long over it. You could see that there was a bit of an issue, because even for the naked eye to notice, there was a difference. It was basically, it took longer than normal, and basically skies it. And I'm no doubt about it. I think if you ask Harry Kane what's the biggest, hardest moment in your career, he will always say that. And so I just felt as if for England, to do that, and we have this area called the mix zone where journalists and TV crews and radio crews speak to the players that come through, and they have to walk through. It can be a bit of a circus at times. It can be a bit of a jungle and a bit of a free for all. Get some crazy requests, crazy people, and crazy things going on. And basically, Harry Kane, in massive credit to him, and indeed the FA Comms team at that time, wanted to get himself out there, knew what a moment it was, knew he would be on every front page, he would be on the lead on every item of news coverage for the next few days, and basically, forever really, and then basically wanted to kind of come and address it. And I will always feel as if that took real courage and resilience, and defines the man, basically. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant player for England. Great captain, great leader. At heart, I'm an England fan. I'm desperate to see England do well. And then to see Harry Kane come through, you could see that he'd been crying. His tears were still on his face. He was still incredibly emotional. And to talk to him about it, talk about his disappointment, what it meant, to hear him say how he feels so guilty about letting the team down, missing the penalty, missing the opportunity. What a terrible moment for him. But he really wanted to lance that boil, and part of the process of that recovery process was talking about it. It will always resonate with me. I'm founder, secretary, chairman, and lifelong president of the Harry Kane fan club. I really am. I think he's amazing, and one of the best players England have ever had, one of the best players I've seen and covered. And basically that, and what he said and the way he handled it, he only, basically goes up in my estimation, basically because of that. I think he's an amazing ambassador for the country, brilliant in his career, one of our all-time greats, one of my personal favourites from a media perspective to cover as well. What an absolute ambassador, gentleman, England great.
Was that the most human moment you've ever seen from an England captain?
Without a shadow of a doubt. I just think that was why. I think sometimes you can choose a captain for particular skills on the pitch and leadership, and I think that's probably more important at club level, whereas I think at international level, you probably have to have a diplomat, a figurehead, and I think someone that really has that connection between dressing room and manager, and because you are talking about the best of that nation in that squad. Well, if they don't respect that kind of that voice and that leader, then you've got problems. And I think that Harry Kane, through that World Cup, I think, wow, the challenges that he had with the armband, which we might talk again about, with being the spokesman of the team in difficult circumstances, and then the ultimate test to have to talk about his experience post the most disappointing night, I would say, of his life or career. I think, wow, it took some real courage and determination. I think he showed exactly why he is England captain, and in my view, goes down as one of England's very best captains.
Andy, I'll bring you in here. Just on the tournament, England's tournament as a whole, were they unlucky to go out when they did, or was it a case of they underperformed and should have been disappointed with how everything went out? Where's your kind of take on the performance generally?
No, I don't think they were unlucky for 1 minute. I don't think they were unlucky. I thought they did quite well in the tournament. Quickly on Harry Kane, echo everything that John said about him as a character, as a captain. I don't think he played particularly well in that tournament. I think the penalty miss was a culmination of, listen, he's got so much on him, John's right. There's so much emphasis on him, so much pressure to lead. I'm not entirely sure that it doesn't affect his game. I don't think he was at his best in that tournament, to say. And obviously, he went on not to have a great Euro 2004 as well. I don't think there was any hard luck stories. I mean, you can think hard luck stories because England played well against France. There's no getting away from that. They played well and were probably the better team for long periods of the game. But then it's up to them to get that over the line. It's up to Kane to score that penalty in the cold light of day. And it's up to them to take the half chances and make better decisions during that game. They didn't. Kane didn't play particularly well. I know he scored from the penalty spot initially. I don't think Jude Bellingham played particularly well in that game. I'm not sure Gareth Southgate, was quick enough with substitutions. So I don't look back at that and think, no, England were unlucky in that tournament at all. I think France got over the line because they were a bit more savvy, and there was no hard luck story. There was no bad refereeing decision really that stood out to actually deny England. Again, I think that was a missed opportunity because it was a good squad of players, and from the moment that obviously it was only Iran in the first game. To win as heavily as they did, 6 goals without Harry Kane scoring, by the way. I mean, and then a little bit of deflation in that sort of tedious 0-0 draw with the States. But then it showed you what a good squad he had when Marcus Rashford came in, Phil Foden came in. These were guys that are not starting games and basically ran Wales ragged in that third game. And then a really good performance against Senegal. So this was a team that was pretty much equipped to go all the way. I think that was there weren't many weaknesses in that squad. Southgate has obviously been there then for a good while. It was his third major tournament. So yes, I came away reading the narrative that England had actually been a little bit unlucky against France because they played well and they missed the penalty. Think, well, actually, yes. But that actually makes it all the more, they're all the more culpable for actually doing that. It's probably a game they could have won, maybe should have won, and didn't in the end. So I think that's why, as you alluded to, I think then there was a more sort of realistic look and saying, well, actually, has Gareth Southgate done as much as he can with this squad? And that obviously became a big debate pretty much soon after that defeat against France.
You both have touched on it there, just sort of talking up the spirit within the camp and the just how well the positive the setup was. But of course, it wasn't all sunshine, rainbows, and harmony. There was a little bit of a interesting incident with Ben White during the group stage. Granted, Ben White wasn't really playing much football, but he was suddenly sent home mid tournament, midway through the group stage. What happened there, Andy? What was going on there?
Well, what was going on? I mean, clearly there had been. So the story then materialised. Clearly, he'd had disagreements with the staff rather than maybe than Southgate's. Clearly, Steve Holland was one in particular who was seen as not seeing eye to eye with Ben White. And essentially, it sounded like the best thing, was for him to decide to go home. He wasn't. You're right. He wasn't going to be part. It's difficult, Harry, on these trips for these England players. It's a test of your character. If you're in a squad, bear in mind they are now 26-man squads, and it was then. And if you're in that bigger squad where you're part of it, but actually you're going to be away from home for a long time, but you're not going to get much football. In fact, you might not get any football, as in terms of minutes on the pitch. And Ben White fell into the category of that he was probably unlikely to get many minutes on the pitch. Hence, then, you've got to keep up your attitude in training. The stories were that was wrong, that he clashed with Holland, and then the best thing to do was for him not to be there. I think it was pretty much like that. It is a case you have to have a special mentality to be along there and be a good tourist. And it turns out, from what it looked like from our point of view, that he wasn't a particularly good tourist and didn't see eye to eye with the England coaching staff.
Yeah, I think it takes all sorts of different shapes and sizes for players and so on. I think Russia had, Danny Welbeck, for example, sort of in there basically, and sort of kind of regarded as a brilliant tourist, a great guy, and so on. And I think some people just adjust to it more. And basically, others, I think of Euro 2024. In that, basically, I think if you ask Gareth Southgate again, he would say, "Well, actually, I didn't enjoy that tournament that much." It's part of the reason was he suddenly had a totally different dynamic because Maguire didn't make the squad. That senior player was missing. That player was missing. All of a sudden, he's called up some young ones and hasn't necessarily got a connection with. And I think basically, honestly, when we talk about what Tuchel should take to America, it's. I don't think that you can't pin it on one person and basically say they're out of order. They've done this wrong. They've done that wrong. They're out of, because Southgate was, in the FA will always say, well, it wasn't really about this and about that with Ben White. And basically, which is fine. But basically, I think it's about the dynamic. It's about that dynamic and striking that chord. And that's when I think that basically when Tuchel spoke, relatively recently, he was talking about having good tourists and basically making sure that the group is together and basically really, really kind of trying to sort of kind of hammer that home, then that basically everything's got to be right to make sure that the dynamic is good and basically everyone's happy. They had a ridiculous scenario in a couple of tournaments, didn't they? Where basically you choose a 26-man squad, but you can only name 23. I mean, in the Euros, previous Euros, in 2021, then basically people were getting really annoyed, and clearly Jadon Sancho got a sort of kind of taste of that. I don't think it was, we should point the finger at him. How would you feel if you train all week and don't even make the bench? I mean, ridiculous. Come on, that's got to be addressed.
It is, if you remember that, so in Qatar, of course, as well, there was other players. I mean, if you remember, John, our first, so we go to the media centre, the England media centre. Was it Al Waka, was it? It was down by a beautiful part of Qatar, down on the beach. We're not far from the beach there. And the first press conference, the first media conference, I think, that we had there was actually given by James Maddison. And he was brilliant. He was typical Maddison. He was funny. He was knockabout. He couldn't have been prouder to be in the squad. He showed pictures of him when he was a kid dreaming of this and whatever. He was great. He was just, he's a larrikin, isn't he? He's a good lad. And and didn't play a moment because he got injured. I mean, an injury came up. It wasn't whatever, but and then you wouldn't see him in training, Any sign of James Maddison? No. And has he gone home? No. And you're thinking, that must be really, really tough for him and for the staff to deal with. You've got to try and keep him happy, give him hope, and it wasn't. And of course, during that, now I think I reckon Cross's memory is better than mine, but Raheem Sterling also went home, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, yeah.
That was because
he did. He had the break. He had the break in, and yes, basically so, that kind of, I mean, there was so much soul searching over that. I do remember kind of with press conference, and we did see Gareth Southgate, for a chat, and basically, a couple of the guys were asking very detailed, intricate questions about Raheem Sterling's movements. And basically, I'm probably known as someone who's about the football as much as anything. I never begrudge anyone a sort of a question, and basically, and a couple of the guys were sort of saying, "Yeah, but when did he get that flight?" Well, I'm thinking, got the World Cup quarter final in a couple of days, and basically, it was just one of I think one of them sort of said to me, "Oh, God, yeah, should we just ask about the groin strains?" And no, not at all. But basically, he's gone, and basically he got broken into. And I think personally, I think that would be very traumatic, especially if you've got family at home. And basically, I honestly, I think sometimes we completely overlook the fact that these people are human beings. And then he's come back. Well, I mean, I think he's done quite the right thing. And then all of a sudden, you've got people saying, "Oh, well, he wouldn't have done that if he was starting or whatever." Well, I mean, that's open debate. We'll never know. But frankly, personally, I will always put my family and first. And basically, I don't begrudge anyone doing that. And it's just the way we view things and sort of kind of an England lens is sometimes absolutely brutal. And basically, I just thought we were getting bogged down in this ridiculous thing in a press conference situation whereby, I'm not sure it even made a line for me. But basically, if they want to carry on about it, fine. But it's these tiny little details that sometimes, sort of very very defining moments, sort of in a press man's mind.
What was it like in Qatar? As a journalist, was it tough dealing with the extreme conditions out there? Obviously, the extreme heat and all of that stuff, but also the culture. Very very strictly conservative religious place. What was it like out there?
No, I mean, there's a brutally honest answer, and it wasn't. It wasn't tough. The conditions. If we judge them in order of sort of how would you say it, sort of seriousness, the conditions were okay. The conditions were never overly oppressive, hence why it was played at the time of year it was played, and the conditions were absolutely fine. From a journalist point of view, let's get your actual practical working conditions out of the way first. Absolutely perfect. They were great. The stadium, as you imagine, were state of the art. The logistics, obviously, were the complete and utter opposite to Russia, where nothing was more than further stadium from where we were was probably Al Bayt, which was probably an hour away in the car. You could drive everywhere. Half an hour to England's training camp. All the stadiums within. We all know it's like the size of Yorkshire or something. It was, so you cannot say from that point of view that it was tough. No, what was tough, of course, and which remains, the sort of the worst thing about Qatar 2022 is that you had to, you were always grappling with that idea that you were just writing, you're writing about football and, talking about substitutions or talking about he should have missed this, he should have that, when we all know that looming over it was the questions of the rights of migrant workers, the rights of the LGBTQ community, the whole concerns from human rights groups about the regime there, all that, you could not get, so you're in that dilemma, you are literally in dilemma, you can't just sit there and say, well, actually, I'm just here to write about the football. I'm just here to write about Lionel Messi. I'm just here to write about whether, Harry Kane scored his penalty or not. That was there all the time. The politics was there in the background every time you looked up to the stands and you saw Infantino and you saw the politicians. You thought to yourself, actually, this doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't feel quite right. And that's because the build-up to it was like that. And it's still one of those things where you couldn't fault it for the way it was organised, but you could fault it for being there. And you still can. I mean, there's no getting away from that. You still can. Listen, when you get there and you get in the football, they were lucky in the fact that the football was good. The football was actually, we worried about it being a Winter World Cup in the middle of a season. It turns out the standard may have even been better because players basically had only had 3 or 4 months of the season rather than being knackered after 9 months of a Premier League, Champions League, Serie A, La Liga season. So, whereas normally they're dropping like flies, they were probably approaching peak fitness. So from a football point of view, it was good. But no, Harry, you could never get away from the fact that you were still somewhere where you had serious reservations about whether it should or shouldn't be staged there.
Just from an atmosphere perspective, a lot was made. You've touched on the kind of, the ways people went hunting for booze. I know it was a concern for fans going in. Would there be fan parks and abilities? What's it going to be like? Obviously, it turned out, there was access to that stuff, but it was obviously limited compared to previous tournaments. From being out there, did that sort of spoil the World Cup in terms of atmosphere a little bit, or did it not really make a difference to the kind of general vibe of the place?
I don't think it just made a difference. It literally was just different. I don't think it spoiled it. I think it was new. It was a new type of atmosphere. It was a new type of demographic watching the football. The atmosphere in the ground was, it was, I think, when people go there, they are conscious that, you go there and no matter, even if you have, your serious reservations about all sorts of things that we've mentioned now, most people go there, but even if they do find it, how should I say, even if it is against their own sensibilities, their own thoughts, their own belief on how you should behave, they go there and they generally respect the local culture. They generally respect the way they live their lives out there. That's generally what happened around and inside the football stadium. That is generally what happened. It was helped by the fact that there were some cracking games of football, and it was a good World Cup with good, games, exciting games, compelling narratives, like the one that it ended up with Lionel Messi lifting that trophy. So that was something that, FIFA, to this day must have been, so, and that was all came across out there. You could tell FIFA, I'm not saying they were smug, but as great games unfolded, as good storylines unfolded, as Messi went further in the tournament, this was it. This was FIFA sort of wiping the brow and thinking, I'm not saying we've got away with one, but, the focus now is not so much on the political situation or whether we should have been here or not. But in simple answer to the question, did it affect the atmosphere? Yes, it changed it, but was it for better or for worse? I would say there's no point in comparing it. It was just different, as we knew it would be, as soon as it was in, December, and as John referred to, in one city, whereas for every other World Cup, we've been all over the place.
Yeah, it's interesting, Andy. You mentioned earlier about the fact that it was mid-season, perhaps contributed to the good quality of football. Because there were some terrific matches. Sadly, England, France, Morocco knocking Portugal out, the all-out war between Argentina and the Netherlands. Obviously we touched on the World Cup final. Croatia and Brazil had some amazing moments. What was the best match you covered out there, just from a kind of spectacle standpoint or entertainment standpoint?
Well, this is the final. The final, without a doubt, was for everything. Everything around the final was just sensational. The whole, storyline, the Messi and Mbappe scenario, just incredible. But in the build up to that, again, I think you've just referenced it there, Netherlands, Argentina in Lusail. It's funny because people, they refer to it as the Battle of Lusail. All of a sudden, Lusail became a sort of on the map, so to speak. And that night was just astonishing. It was one of those nights where you did not literally know what was going on. You didn't know if someone had been sent off, if they hadn't, who was fighting with who. You had a bizarre situation of, I think it was Weghorst coming on and scoring two, a guy who'd been sort of pilloried by the English media, basically, coming on and scoring two worldies, and basically it all kicking off. It was just the most astonishing game. And it was late, working at the game, you really didn't know where to start, to say you couldn't keep, and that almost gave you the template for what the final was in the end, and everything about that was just, the whole Argentina narrative throughout the whole thing. They got beat by Saudi Arabia in the first game, of course, but then the Messi story took on a life of its own. So, but no, I would say that game, the Dutch versus Argentina, for the sheer spitefulness of it on occasions, and it was nasty. It was nasty, but it was also a compelling watch.
For me, definitely the final. You go to tournaments and you basically, so many times it's the focal point, and basically we're thinking, okay, this is going to be a classic. It's got all the ingredients, and it never lives up to expectation. This one, the drama, the excitement, the storyline, Martinez and Messi and Mbappe, and it was just crazy. I love the kind of the Argentinian siege mentality, and basically the way that they kind of tried to alienate and to kind of make themselves sort of enemies against the press. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute, you did lose to Saudi Arabia, and basically, what do you think? You might get praise for that performance. I remember thinking, wow, sort of kind of, it wasn't by no means was it a classic team, Argentinian team, but they just had a spirit and a unity, and basically to watch kind of people like McAllister grow, I didn't realise just how good he was. I just didn't. And basically, he's gone on to be an absolute fantastic player, Premier League winner as well. And I just, just an amazing thing. And the Messi story to kind of culminate in that, I just thought was sensational, absolutely amazing. I just thought, wow, what an occasion! Really, I thought it was phenomenal. It was sort of kind of the crowning glory just before Christmas. Amazing.
Did this World Cup cement Lionel Messi as the greatest player of all time in your eyes?
You know what? I actually, it's a weird one, because I watched a lot of Argentina in that tournament in 2002, in 22. I watched a lot of him, and you know what? I mean, it's one of those where, he kept popping up and scoring, and they kept winning after the Saudi game, and then he did what he does in the final. And it's one of those where you're writing, you think, well, actually, Messi's not done much. It's like, what did he do apart from, and then you go, blah, 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 blah. It's one of those where when he wasn't producing a match-winning contribution, which was a lot of the time, he actually didn't do much. Because in nature, he actually sort of, they literally, John mentioned McAllister, superb for Argentina. Arguably, a better player for Argentina was, and certainly in the final, who was outstanding, was Julian Alvarez. It was superb in the tournament. I mean, absolutely superb. And these players, if you like, they were doing, it was a classic where they were doing I wouldn't say the donkey work, but they were making it possible for Messi to shine, because they were doing everything that he, couldn't do because he's got so many miles on the clock. But you just had the feeling that something was going to happen. You just really did have the feeling that it sounds cliche, but that it was written, that it was actually, written in the football stars that it was going to happen. Did it make me think he's, I thought by then he's the best player I've ever seen. Did he play to the standards overall that I've seen him play to? Well, no, he didn't. But what he did was he coped with and he was, the talisman for that team, the leader of that team. And it's the hopes of an entire nation. And you can imagine, if you think that we have, very sort of fervent hopes and whatever, then Argentina, you just have to mix with their press pack, John, don't you? And the expectations and the pressure, and he dealt with it. He dealt with it. It was astonishing. It really was. And of course, he is as cool as you want. He scores in the penalty shootouts. He doesn't miss. He scores from the spot in the same way, obviously, that Mbappe scored 2 in normal time from the spot in the final. But he's just, we've spoken before about Harry Kane's penalty taken. Messi was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
And again, I just want to get a little bit more of a feel of just sort of what it was like on the ground at Qatar. So I'm just going to throw a few quick fire questions at you. Again, take as much time or as little time as you want. There are no rules here. Go on. We'll start with you, John. Again, best and worst thing about being in Qatar 2022.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt, the best thing was the One City World Cup. I thought it was. I mean, we're terrible. I'm particularly me. I've been lucky enough to do lots of trips and lots of great excursions and so on. At a time you moan and gripe and all that sort of stuff, and then basically you look back in time and think, oh, that was amazing. That was so, and probably through rose tinted glasses, but basically it was like sharing a dorm sometimes with your pals, basically, and a sort of it was a giggle. I had my birthday while we were out there. And basically, we had sort of kind of my birthday lunch on the beach, and that was a great deal of fun. And then silly things like the other guys in a different thing ran out of petrol, and so we had to go and rescue them on a motorway. And it's just really silly stuff, and it was a giggle and it was fun. And
Crossy's driving was the worst thing. I mean, driving in Qatar, driving in Doha is scary. Let me tell you, I didn't do much of it.
When Crossy's about,
Crossy generally did it, but I mean, I have to say, even he was blameless on some occasions. Driving is just, unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Considering you didn't have to go very far. But yeah, the best thing, the stadiums were fascinating. I found the stadiums fascinating. Obviously, we had the one stadium that was made totally out of, used containers that was then dismantled at the end of the tournament. The facilities were fantastic. The organisation was great. The best thing, the worst thing. I totally agree with John that it's you still came away not totally. You're not comfortable. You are not comfortable with your own convictions, with your own. Somehow you're still. You cannot just say this is just about the football. But it's a fascinating place again. Though you go there, and even though it was, it's relatively small compared to, to other hosts and whatever. Again, it was quite fascinating to see, the heritage. One of the strangest things was the camel racing. Which is it's fantastic bit of their heritage. So they have robo jockeys on. They don't have jockeys on. They have little robots dressed up in silks that are perched on these camels to go away, because they used to have children riding them, and that clearly. Was not a good thing. So it was good that they got the robots involved. And that was part of, and the whole, as John said, going down to the souk and just seeing a little bit of the history and the culture. It is, that's, you can take that away from the overarching issues that you couldn't get away from.
Was this tournament England's biggest missed opportunity? I mean, this century or beyond that, if you want to win a World Cup.
Yes, from my perspective, 100%. I think it was the tournament where everyone was coming together at the same time. Good defence, really outstanding midfield, Harry Kane up front. What's not to like? This was the opportunity, and yet they go out, to France in the quarterfinal stage, where I think they played well. I thought that was the moment. Basically, if you're going to do it, you have to have some luck along the way. Basically, there was always this talk, wasn't there, about the FA kind of at St George's Park marking off. This is our time. The clock is ticking. And basically, when it comes to fruition, it never works out like that. So everything has to fall into place. You've got to have the team, the manager, the players at the right time, peaking. Everything was there, and that for me was the biggest wasted opportunity, because they were not exhausted after a long Premier League season. They'd only just started. The manager was definitely had the squad togetherness. Everything was good in good departments. What will undo England this summer, I think, in the US is ultimately the defence and maybe the weather conditions. But the defence was peak, and basically everything was there: structure, togetherness, unity, and that's why I feel it was the biggest missed opportunity.
Should Southgate have gone after that World Cup?
I personally think I think so. I think that he talked, didn't he, after there was a game at Molineux where basically he thought about going, and in every respect, I think. at the time I was pleased that he stayed, but it was interesting then that in reality, he was almost thinking about going before. And I think that the worst thing you can do, I think Gareth Southgate was phenomenal for England, absolutely amazing for England. And I thought what he's done for the nation is undervalued, underestimated, and deserves more respect, I think, on every level. He's transformed England from being a laughing stock, toxic one at that, into being genuine contenders and basically have a proper structure, a really good team, and everything that's set up. But I equally felt that as if that was the end of the road. And at the time, I was hoping that he'd stayed. But in retrospect, I think he started, I always remember sort of kind of, that the game was on Saturday, wasn't it? And basically it was the start of that week, I was thinking he'd go. And then basically it quickly emerged I would say by the Wednesday that he was gonna stay. I think he basically thought better of it, and sort of kind of players and what have you, and sort of kind of a few signs and sort of convinced him to stay. But I personally think he looked exhausted and done by the Euro 2024. Yet still England got to the final. It was an amazing achievement, by hook or by crook in a way. But that doesn't matter. Basically, I personally think it would have been better in retrospect if he'd gone then, and yeah, it would have been the end of an incredible journey, but he knew he was so close and couldn't resist having one more go. But Gareth Southgate, for me, the best thing that's happened to England in my lifetime, really.
I get what John says in the way that Southgate was at the end of that tournament. Clearly brought on, with everything that he took it. That one, that you have to deal with as England manager, but two, what he took it upon himself to deal with. He saw that as a duty to get involved in stuff that was, off the field, stuff that was maybe with a broader remit than just actually the football. And John has brought up the armband situation, and I think that probably affected him a bit, all the talk that consumed a lot of the time. There's got to come a time when you think, well, actually, I'm trying to get a football team out here to win a football match. I should be on the training ground, deciding whether it's going to be 4-4-2 or 3-4-3 or whatever, system you want to play. There's going to be a time when I'm with Steve Holland, and, I get that. But then, on the other hand, I do think from his point of view is that he was almost, he was born to be in an FA Blazer. He was born to be an England coach. He is, quintessentially an FA man, a St. George's Park man. As much as, I suspect, I'm not casting aspersions, but, certain England managers probably wouldn't buy into the St. George's Park idea or being based there. Gareth, that was his manner. So he was a natural born FA England manager, which is why I wasn't surprised when he carried on. Why, I get what John says when I said that he looked a bit, the strain was getting maybe to him at Euro 2004, but I still think he was the best manager out there to do the job, and so it proved by, albeit not to everyone's taste, his football by taking us to the final. So, no, I wouldn't say he should have quit, no. And even in retrospect, I'm glad he didn't, and I certainly don't think the performance there overall, even though they were beaten by France in that quarter-final, demanded that he should quit.
That's it for our trip back to Qatar 2022. Tune in again for more Untold Stories from the FIFA World Cup. And our coverage doesn't stop there. For all the latest on the tournament, you can keep up to date by following Mirror Football on social media or by visiting mirror.co.uk/football. And don't forget to subscribe to Make Football Great Again on YouTube, Apple and Spotify. And please leave a comment to join the conversation with myself, John, Andy and Jeremy Cross. And we'll see you next time. Let's make football great again.